Good morning and welcome to this special session of Decypher Spotlight, our new interview series by the Advanced Study Institute of Asia. My name is Neeti Gautam. I am a researcher in demography and health at Asia, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. The Decypher Spotlight series features distinguished scholars, regional experts, and practitioners with deep engagement in countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Thailand, Cambodia. The series is designed to explore the critical crises, historical shifts, and the political transformations shaping these regions. Through these meaningful conversations, our goal is to generate fresh insights and foster a more rigorous understanding of Asia's evolving geopolitical and socio-economic landscape. This initiative is part of Asia's larger commitment to inform scholarship and open discourse on contemporary Asian issues. This session will be available on our YouTube channel under a special Decypher Spotlight playlist aimed at researching a wider audience and those interested in in-depth conversations on regional affairs. Today, I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Professor Mahendra Lawoti, a leading scholar on political institutions and democracy. Professor Lawoti is a professor of political science at Western Michigan University, where he specializes in democratization, political institutions, and ethnic politics in South Asia. He has authored and edited several influential works, including Towards a Democratic Nepal, Inclusive Political Institutions for a Multicultural Society. He has written widely on inclusive democracy, federalism, and the structural roots of exclusion in Nepal. His work has not only shaped academic thinking, but also contributed to the real-world political discourse in the region. Joining us in the conversation with Professor Lawoti is my colleague, Ms. Priyanka Garodia, she is a geopolitical and security researcher at Asia with deep interest in international relations research. She will be leading today's dialogue. With that, I'll hand over to Priyanka to begin the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeti, and thank you, Professor Lawoti, for joining us today for this conversation. When I began research and I was figuring out what to do, and I saw there is so much to talk about and so much to discuss with regards to Nepal's, rich political and social history. But I think we've narrowed down a few areas that we would like to start our discussion with. And so, my first question to you, Professor, would be that David Gellner has described the 1990s as sort of being that period where Nepal was building its ethnicity. So he calls it ethnicity building. And a lot of give and take was established during that time in Nepali society. So if you could kindly explain to us how much of that ethnicity building still exists today, how much of that has eroded, and what are its manifestations that are being presently witnessed in the popular protests that have gripped the nation in the last couple of months. If you could sort of, start us off with giving us the lay of the land, specifically after the comprehensive peace agreement comes into play, and what are some of the consequences of that post-war power sharing that we still see today in Nepali society?
Thank you, Niti and Priyanka. I think Priyanka had a number of questions, so I'll try to remember most of the things and try to respond. So just to begin with what David Gellner, a colleague, had written, he and his colleagues had written about ethnic building. I would rather use the term nation building, not in the sense of a state nation building, but in terms of different ethnic groups transforming into nations. For example, Nepal is a very diverse society. It has around 125 languages are spoken within the country. There are so many ethnic groups, caste groups, and so on. So what David was describing at the time was, with the change in 1990, with the transformation, Nepal became democratic in the sense that people were allowed to speak, freedom of expression, freedom of associations, and so on were introduced. So that was the first time different ethnic groups, which had been marginalized for several centuries, got opportunity to make demands, to form associations, and so on. So that was what we saw in the early 1990s. Large number of groups, maybe you could say even hundreds, caste and ethnic groups, religious minorities, and so on, I mean, uh, trying to articulate their needs, their demands, the way they had been exploited, repressed, and so on. And that continues. That is today also, it has continues, and it partly continues because many of the demands made by these groups have not been addressed even by the last constitution. So the need is there, the grievances is there, but it has not been addressed. So as a result, it continues, and in terms of different ways. And I would argue, and I have been arguing, that these movements have been gaining strength. Just one simple example, in 2006-7, we saw the Madhesi movement. That was the first movement of different minorities or different ethnic groups that emerged and became successful in putting federalism in the constitution, the term federalism, which earlier was not there. And they went on to have another movement, and they have been, compared to other ethnic groups, more successful in having their demands addressed. Then in the last elections, we saw the Tharus, who had been repressed, gained significant seats in the parliament, in the regional parliament, in the central parliament, and so on. And after the elections, we have seen the No-Kosi movement in the east, the Mukulu movement, which have, become quite, widespread mobilization. There are many other movements and mobilizations as well, but these two in the east have become, a bit, strengthened and widespread. So in that sense, I think what we see is, with the passage of time, more groups are become more successful in launching more sustained movements. And there are many other groups still trying to do that. They have not reached, I think, the stage of political awareness, maybe institutions forming, associations forming, and so on. So I think as time passes, I think we'll see in Nepal other movements becoming more stronger as well. So now, with regard to the, power sharing of the Maoist peace agreement, with the Maoist and power sharing peace agreement, I think what that has done is, it significantly introduced multi-party system in Nepal. Before that, what we had in Nepal was largely two parties alternating in power. Sometimes the Royalist Party would also emerge as a playmaker, but it was largely the Nepali Congress and Communist Party of Nepal, UML, MLA, shortly mentioned. So those were the two. But with the emergence of Maoist, now, we had at least, there are other political parties also, but three major political parties. So now that has further expanded. So in the last elections, we saw other new parties emerging as well. The Rashtriya Swatantra Party got significant seats. In the Madhesh, Dr. C.K. Raut's party also got significant seats. As I had mentioned earlier, the Tharuat Party also got significant seats, and so on. So I think the power sharing agreement, and it kind of broke the monopoly of the two large political parties, and that has allowed other political parties to emerge, including the Maoists. And when we say other political parties emerge, we have seen Madhesi parties arise also. So the Forum, led by Upendra Yadav in the initial stage, the party led by Mahanta Thakur, now the party led by C.K. Raut, and so on. So what this shows is, I think, the ethnic, if you would, the minorities groups have become more, with the passage of time, their agenda, their movement, their strength is growing, even though we may not see them every day on the streets, and so forth. So I hope I answered some of your questions. And if I have not, if you would remind me, I'll be happy to do that.
Given Nepal's complicated societal the present relations, I think you've done like the best job ever. But sir, Nepal has, if you consider the 1990s, as you said, to not be ethnicity building but rather nation building, so Nepal has not been kind to its minorities when it comes to representation. Their grievances exist, like they haven't been, like you've mentioned, they haven't been addressed in the 2005 constitution, neither were they addressed before. We've seen popular movements by the Tharus, the Madhesis. You've mentioned all of these communities coming out to protest. If even at the cost of oversimplification and redundancy, why has the Nepali state been unable to make room? Has it been unable to, or rather is it unwilling to make room for its minorities? If you could sort of help us understand why the state has not been able to popularly accept its minorities, that would be something that we could touch upon now.
Okay. Just going before into that, just want clarification in terms of the nation building term. I prefer to use, I like the definition of nation as self-defined political community. So earlier there were diversity, but increasingly now the communities themselves have trying to assert themselves as a nation or as a community. So in that sense, when I'm talking about nation building, I'm not talking about Nepali state nation building. I'm talking about multi-nations emerging and asserting their identity, saying that we are Madheshi, we are Tharu, we are Limbu, we are Rai, and so on. So in that sense. Now, with regard to your main question, why is the Nepali state not, accommodating demands and addressing the grievances of other minorities? That is because Nepal is a mono-ethnic state. So it's a state ruled by one ethnic group, forming of four supposedly high caste hill Hindus. So, and what does an ethnic group do? It tries to protect its interest. So that is one reason why, the Nepali state is not sensitive to the issues of other minorities. When other Madhisi raise issues, when Adivasis or Janjatis or indigenous nationalities make their demands, when the Dalits make their demands and so on, the mono-ethnic state, the Nepali state, thinks that this is a threat to the Nepali state. So it's not threat to the Nepali state, but it's threat to their monopoly over the state. So that is the reason why they don't. That's usually, you see what ethnic groups do. When they control the state, they hang on to it. But then, why haven't, there is another dimension of this question as well. Uh, in Nepal, if you compare different minorities, the Madhesi have been able to, get more concession than other indigenous nationalities, Dalits, minority religious groups, and so on. Why? Because Madhesi were able to organize and mobilize and launch sustained movements. And then the Dalits are probably the least mobilized, so their concerns, even though not significant, major concerns, they have probably been the least addressed. Then in the middle comes the indigenous nationalities. So the second part of the reason why the minorities issues have not been addressed is because of the lack of mobilization, lack of institution building within them, lack of forming associations, and so on. So my one, take would be, as I described earlier, as association forming, as organization forming, network forming, and so on, expands, increases, other minorities would also be able to address their concerns. And more important, in Nepal, since the ruling ethnic group is not even a one-third, is 31% of the population. So if other groups, the different minorities, the Madhesis, the indigenous nationalities, the Dalits, the minority religious groups, if they can come together and form some sort of network or even launch, if successful, launch a movement by identifying the common minimum issues and so on, I think that would be an easier route in terms of how they might be able to address their concerns. But the challenge in Nepal is, as anywhere, the ruling ethnic group, has been using a very effective strategy in terms of dividing these different minorities. So, to the indigenous nationalities and the Dalits, they'll say that the Madheshis have less loyalty to the Nepal. They are more, I mean, sympathetic to India and so on. With regard to Dalit, they will say to the Madheshi Hindu elite and Paharis, these people are untouchables. They are there to be exploited and so on. And with regard to the indigenous nationalities, they'll tell the Madhishi that we are Hindus, so we have that common. But these indigenous nationalities, they are not Hindus, or they say they belong to Buddhism, nature worshippers, bone poism, and so on. So we are, as a Hindu group, we have common aspirations, but these are not Hindus, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, the ruling state ethnic group has been able to divide these different minorities. So that's why, I mean, one would think that they all, I mean, have been oppressed by one ruling ethnic group. They should come together. So why has it been slow? Because the division, I mean, it's decades, centuries long, I mean, division in the mind that has been created, that has been a challenge.
Thank you, sir. That leads to like a couple of questions that's coming up in my mind. So, firstly, like you mentioned, that these communities have had their are scattered. They aren't really politically, united, and which is that's one of the reasons why the Khas Aryan community has been able to manipulate them into things. That's perhaps one factor that Nepali minority groups haven't been able to mobilize politically. Are there other external and internal factors that perhaps exacerbate this, this lack of political mobilization amongst these communities? That would be my first question. And secondly, what are some of the manifestations of this weakened political unity in these communities and the dominance that the Khas Aryan group still, perpetrates over through the monopoly of like the mono-ethnic Nepali state, as you call it. So, what could the possible results of this be? Are we seeing separatist movements in the future, or are we seeing the possibility of civil wars, or are these groups still so scattered that we're not really seeing a unified opposition to the, the ethnic majoritarian rule that the Nepali state has put in place? So these are like just some questions that maybe we could break down in three parts, and you could perhaps walk us through it.
Okay, again, I'll try to remember all the questions and respond. So, the first question with regard to other internal and external factors, I don't know whether to call it a factor or not. So, what the ruling ethnic group has been able to do to divide the communities, in terms of dividing the communities within themselves across different inter communities, but there is intra division as well. The ruling group has, for example, the ruling party controls all the three major political parties: the Nepali Congress, the Nepal MLA, and the Maoist. So all are headed by the ruling ethnic group. And what they have been doing, I mean, since all the elections, is they have been providing some lower level positions to members of different ethnic groups. So now, since the last constitution, I mean, the constitution itself, that whatever seats obtained by political parties have to be then, in terms of proportional, I mean, votes, whatever the seats they get, constitutionally, they have to allocate between different ethnic groups. So what that has allowed them to do is, I mean, provide those seats to Madhesis, indigenous nationalities, and Dalits. And members of this group, because they continue to support and vote for those group, because they, in terms, I mean, the leaders see that those are some of the opportunities available for them. So that was why, there are multiple reasons, but that is one of the reasons why the ethnic movements, the nationalist movements have not spread to the extent it should have. So that is one internal factor. In terms of external factor, I wouldn't say, I mean, in Nepal, there's a lot of conspiracies about external, I mean, penetration, external interventions, and so on. But I think external actors can intervene only when they have a basis inside. So as a result, up to now, I think, as any state, not only the Nepali state, but the Chinese state, including the Indian state, if they want to, I mean, have something done in the national interest of those countries, they'll talk with the ruling people, the ruling ethnic group. So when Indian state talks with Nepali state, they are talking with the Nepali mono-ethnic group. So when the Chinese state is supposedly talking with the Nepali state, it is not talking with the representative of the Nepali people, but with the leaders from one ethnic group that has its own interest, that has been resisting changes, and so on. So I would say, if, I mean, one has to say, probably the international, I mean, or at least the external factors have been, actors have not worked or supported the minorities movement. But the minorities, being it's a global world, they have drawn, I mean, aspirations from international movements and so on and so forth. So as a result, the Dalits, they have networks with Dalit associations in India, the indigenous nationalities, they have network with indigenous groups around the world and so on. And there are nationalist movements and so on from which they get aspirations and so on. So that is, I mean, my understanding and take about the external and internal factors. Now, with regard to manifestations of what these, the lack of uh, concessions to these minorities, would it lead to separatist movements or even conflicts and so on? Nepal has witnessed separatist movements. For example, there were several groups in Tarai or in Madhes that declared separatism and launched groups. And there was one separatist group within the Limbu community as well. They call themselves the Pallukrat group and so on. But in the last decade or so, the separatist movement have kind of, I mean, slowed down. Dr. C.K. Raut, he started as a separatist group, demanding and advocating that Madhesh will form its own state. But lately, I mean, a few years, or maybe 4, 5, or 6 years back, he settled with the state and he gave up the separatist movement. The groups that split with him also have kind of given up the separatist movement. And partly because I think increasingly among the separatist group, or at least among their constituencies, there is a feeling that if they mobilize, if they organize and mobilize and launch successful movements like the Madheshi, they can also have their issues addressed. And I think in Nepal that is a possibility because of the demographic strength of different ethnic groups. If the ruling group had been a majority group, I think that would have been a challenge in terms of demography. So they are not. The ruling group is, I mean, it controls the state because of the historical. I mean, they have been controlling the state since nearly 300 years, more than 250 years. So they control the security mechanism, they control the bureaucracy, they control the political parties, and so on. So that's how they have been able to, not through the demographic strength, but through their historical penetration of these state institutions and so forth. So, but as I had said earlier, now the Madhishis have rebelled against it. The Tharos have rebelled against it. Even in the East Nepal, in the by-election, in one of those by-elections, the indigenous groups were not able to win, but they got significant votes, much more higher, 4 times higher than before. So, in that sense, that shows that there is a strict movement plus electoral path to getting the concessions these minorities might have been demanding.
Thank you, Professor. That makes things a little easier. So, the 2005 Constitution that was established, this I'm drawing from some of your recent scholarship, adopted a federal model, which you seem to say is problematic, and because of and we've seen instability in Nepal for a significant period of time. If you could elaborate on some of the structural shortcomings of this constitutional of the constitution and the seven province model that it promoted, and how that sort of connects to the way that, like you've said, that the ethnic majority is a 31% of the population. It's not really, it's not significant in terms of demography, but they've been able to manipulate structures, and there have been allegations of gerrymandering on the Khas Aryan group specifically. So if you could walk us through how structurally the constitution has been manipulated by the ethnic majority to produce some of the consequences of what we see in Nepal today. So, and from that, if we could connect the popular protests that are taking place in the country right now to reinstate the monarchy, because we are seeing that we have a constitution in place that clearly is not catering to all the demands of the groups, the ethnic groups that exist in the country. And how and how are we seeing that the call for monarchy, which could be a small few, if you could sort of like help us understand how such sentiments can be in place.
Okay, again, I'll try to remember the questions and so on. So, just
I'll
for
do my
clarification, the recent constitution is 2015 constitution. And one of the, there are a number of issues. I'll come to the federal issues in a minute. But before that, what the political parties have done is the major political parties has devised the constitution in such a way that their influence in different branches of the government would continue. For example, recently in the last, you could say the last around 8, 10 years, and before that also, but more so, what the political parties have been doing is staffing not only the bureaucracy, the constitutional commissions such as the anti-corruption agency, and even the court, including the Supreme Court, with their loyalists. And they do it by, because in the Constitution, Article I think 284, there is a constitutional recommendation, commission that recommends different, I mean, persons to these high positions, such as the Supreme Court, the Appellate Court, or the constitutional commissions like the anti-corruption agencies and so on. And it is dominated by the political parties. There is, I think, the Prime Minister, opposition leader, chairman of the upper house, chairperson of the lower house, and so on. So basically, the top politicians, they decide who gets appointed to different positions. And they have been appointing their loyalists. So they divide it among themselves. One party will try to appoint all its loyalists, But if they don't get the majority in that committee, recommendation committee, then they share the positions and so on. So that is why nowadays many of the top politicians, they have been engaging in corruption openly because they know that nothing will happen to them. Why? Because the anti-corruption agencies, commissioners are filled by the loyalists. So, and in the anti-corruption agency, I have heard there is a process whereby there should be a consensus among the commissioners to start the investigation. So if you have one loyalist in the anti-corruption agency, then he can or she can block it, or he or she can protect you from being investigated. So that is one issue. So that's how they have. I mean, if you just turn over the pages of the Constitution, it looks as if it's a perfect Constitution. But the way they operate is they have allowed them to, manipulate it. Now, with regard to the federalism, so I call supposedly the seven province structure as federalism. It has been called federalism. I call it a pseudo federalism, one, and second, I call it mono-ethnic federalism. So pseudo federalism, why? Because the provinces don't have any power at all. They are allocated some budgets. There are people elected to the provincial assembly, but the provinces don't have any significant power at all. The local governments in Nepal, they have significant power, but the provincial governments have not been provided any power. So, for example, the police, the administrators are all under the center. So even the police and chief district officers in different provinces are deputed by the center. So the provinces have no power. So center controls everything. So that's why I call it pseudo, because in a federalism, constitutionally there should be some significant power to the provinces. I use the term pseudo because scholars have used to call the Soviet Union federalism as pseudo, because in Soviet Union also supposedly you had federalism, but the Communist Party, Soviet Communist Party, by different mechanism, controlled everything. So only whatever the center wanted used to be carried out in the provinces. So that's why it's a pseudo federalism, because the provinces don't have any power, any significant power. They cannot transfer even a police constable. It is done by the center. So then, with regard to monoethnic federalism, it's a excellent case of gerrymandering. So what these people have done is, I'll talk about the alternative model, that will help to explain. So in this 7 province model, except province 2, the Madhya province, in all 6 provinces, the Khas Arya has gerrymandered in such a way that they either become the majority or a large plurality. So in the eastern 2 provinces, they are a majority. Western 2 provinces, they are a majority. So for example, in province number 1, Khas Arya is 28% of the population. The second largest group is only 12%. So they are more than double. So they have created those kind of, they have created gerrymandered in such a way that they are either a large plural group or a majority. And what is the manifestation of that? So that means in the 6 provinces except Madhya, the Khas Arya will always have a majority or near majority in all the 6 provinces. So out of the 7 provinces, Khas Arya will dominate in the 6 provinces. So based on that, the policies they prefer will be implemented in terms of cultural, in terms of linguistics, in terms of minority issues, and so on. But then that is not only the issue. Then from those 6 provinces, they send majority or near majority representative to the center, because the elections are based on the provinces, no? So they not only control the 6 out of 7 provinces, whereas they also control the center. So in that sense, practically it's a mono ethnic federalism, if we were to call it federalism. So then the question arises, I mean, is that the only possible way to construct a federal structure in Nepal? No. The constituent assemblies, the first constituent assembly, the assembly committee came up with a 14 province model. Then, because these ruling parties didn't like it, ruling groups didn't like it, they blocked it. So then they formed a recommendation commission, which came with a 10th province model. So in 10th province model, what happens is there are other ethnic groups also. Now in Madhesi become majority, but in the hills and Tharwat, these many of these groups now become a plurality. So they don't become a majority, but Limbus would become a plurality, Rai would become a plurality, Thai would form a Tharu would form a plurality, and so forth. Newar would form a plurality, Tamang would form a plurality. They will not form majority. So that is possible. And if that had happened, then the voices, the aspirations could have been addressed, because other groups would also have significant presence in these various models, provinces, and so on. But the ruling group denied it. Not only denied it, this will illustrate how the monoethnic ruling group conspires to deny the majority and so on. So, for example, in the first Constituent Assembly, the supporters of this 10 plus or 14 province, they had a two-third majority in the Constituent Assembly. So what did this ruling group do? They refused to take the issue to the full floor of the House. So because the chair was in their control, so they asked the chair of the House to not to take. So I think, I don't exactly remember, the chair postponed the full House of the meeting for around a dozen times. Because if it had been taken to the floor, two-third majority would have supported it. So then that is one aspect of the conspiracy. Then the other aspect of the conspiracy is what they did was the first Constitution Assembly was for 2 years. So within the 2 years, these issues, largely the federal structure model and the executive system model, those were the only two issues left remaining. On all other issues, there was some sort of consensus. So then what these people did is they influenced the court, and I mean, made the court rule that after the third extension of the Constituent Assembly, it will automatically dissolve. So it was the court that made that rule. It was not a political rule. And were they able to do it? Because they control the court. Because the past court had. So that is how these groups, the ruling monoethnic majority, have been manipulating not only the constitution, they manipulated the constitution by the earlier I said how they recommend top positions and how they form the federal structures, but they manipulate even the process. So the Constitution Assembly was a constitution making process, no? So there was support, more than two-thirds support to this 10 plus province model. But these guys, because they control the Supreme Court, they control the bureaucracy, they control the security, the military, and so forth. So that's how they operate. So if they continue to do that, I think then I think what you earlier hinted, separatist movement could so forth and so on emerge. But the optimistic side is when the Madhesis learns very sustained movement. First, this group they try to repress it. But if they cannot repress it, then they conceded to some of the demands of the Madhesis. In Tharwat, they were able to repress the movement. But then, because of the widespread repression, the Tharwan parties then later on, they won the elections. So in the East also now they are repressing. And in the East also we have seen that because of the repression, people are becoming more alienated and so on. So based on the Madhishi case, if other groups are able to learn sustained movement, then the ruling monoethnic group may concede to some of the demands. But let's see how this will emerge.
So, just to follow that up, like when what we're seeing in Nepal then is a patronage-based model that has emerged, right? And as you mentioned before, that the corruption bureau also is filled with people who can get people out of scams, etc. So there's a certain sense of impunity that has emerged within the people of Nepal, specifically the ethnic majority. So, how would that then connect to the economic situation that we see Nepal in? Because it is one of the poorer countries of the world. Its GDP is not as remarkable as we would like it to be. And we've seen that there's a significant lack of industrial acumen as well in Nepal, specifically when it comes to developing tourism, when it comes to startup industries, or even if it comes to like the casinos and the different avenues of revenue. Nepal significantly derives its income from its remittances from abroad, the community that is abroad. So how would we connect the ethnic politics that exists in Nepal, the present political systems in place, and the economic condition of the country, if we were to be able to link all of this?
I think the way the economy is being affected is, for example, you say, in Nepal, the culture of impunity is very widespread. And the culture of impunity has gone to the extent that now there is chronic capitalism. So there are a few, supposedly trading houses. So the way they make money in other parts of the world, industrialists, traders, they work hard, they make money. In Nepal, they set up things. So they manipulate the laws and so on. So as a result, they have not become rich simply by hard working, but they have simply become rich by manipulating the laws. For example, there was one controversy several years ago. uh, the son of one of the prominent political leaders. Supposedly, he became a dealer of foreign company that uh, export the pads women use for during the period. During that time, there was a very well functioning pad manufacturing unit which was popular in Nepal. But then, since this gentleman had all the power, he increased the local taxes to the Nepali manufacturer, and he had the import taxes reduced because saying that there are not enough the sanitation pads in Nepal. So why is that possible? Because of, impunity, because of this chronic capitalism and so on. So that's how things operate in Nepal. So you don't have to work hard to make money. All you have to do is you have to have the right connections to influence the policies so that your venture will get massive profit and so forth. So this is just an example. But the consequences is when what there are a lot of scholarship in economic development and so on, including by those Robinson, Asimoglu, that Nobel Award winning work. Their argument is if there is no rule of law, then that means hardworking people cannot make money. industrialist trades, and so on. So that will discourage entrepreneurship. So that means there will be less economic development because if there is no rule of law, if there are strong institutions, if there are rule of laws, then many people would like to, make more money. But if, you work hard, but then the other guy with connections and so on wins the race, then people don't engage in entrepreneurship and so forth. So, in that sense, why is Nepal still underdeveloped and still not catching up with even its neighbors? To a large extent, it's because of corruption, the lack of rule of law, the culture of impunity, crony capitalism, and that is why, people just migrate to as workers, those who are more educated and so on, just move abroad and so forth, and that has, I think, because of that phenomenon going on in Nepal, I think all Nepalis have been affected. But the people who have benefited, the small circle of people who have benefited, are either the top leadership and the clients in this patron client network, their clients that reaches down to the village, and those who have connections with them, the industrialists, the entrepreneurs, and so on, those have connections with them. So it's a small group. But unfortunately, because of this widespread corruptions and so on, now I think people are increasingly more dissatisfied with these major political parties. So that's why we have seen multi-party system from a two-party system. And I think it manifested in the last elections, also in the local elections, in the parliamentary elections as well. I think the dissatisfaction has increased. I think in the new elections also, I think the vote base of the three last parties will probably continue to erode because the culture of impunity continues. The country is still poor, has not been able to catch up. People don't have hopes, and now people have become to the patron client network because now people don't have to. People who have gone to work abroad, for example, in the Middle East, now since their income is coming from outside, they don't have to rely on these local patrons. So there is some level of economic independence from that aspect also. So that is the result, and I hope in the coming elections we'll see further marginalization of the three last parties in Nepal.
So where does the monarchy fit into all this? And we glossed over this before, but like,
Okay.
and we've seen these protests emerge. How much of it is actually genuine public sentiment? How much of it is a product of like a misinformation propagation machinery? How much of it is a specific interest of a particular community in place? And how does the monarchy sort of fit into this whole, this landscape that you've painted for us, both social and economic?
Thank you for reminding. I think while talking about other things that so, recently we saw the monarchist movement in Kathmandu, and largely in Kathmandu. And my own sense is uh, the monarchist group, they were able to exploit the disenchantment of the people, the common people, and so forth. But I think in Nepal, there is, no risk of monarchy, no chance of monarchy to come for a couple of reasons. One, just, logistical part, the monarchist party is not strong. It has not won, I don't think it has won any seats, maybe one or two seats in the hills. So, except in Kathmandu, it has a strong presence. It has not, it doesn't have a presence to win elections, but it has a strong presence enough to make noise. Why does it have strong presence? Because Kathmandu was the bastion of the monarchy for nearly 300 years. So all the beneficiaries of the monarchy they live in the Kathmandu, they still enjoy the privileges and so forth. They may not have access to power, but the economic privileges, the cultural privileges, they still enjoy, and they are highly alienated because they don't have the now political power. So, for example, I think most of the TV shows, major TV shows and broadcasters are monarchists in Kathmandu. So that's how, I mean, they make a lot of noise, but they don't have the strength to, I mean, the popular backing. Why is there is less popular backing? Because of the generational gap. I think young people don't know about the monarchy. So as I mean, the older generation, I mean, passes away, I think the monarchy's uh, strength or base will further erode. The only, I mean, the chance for them to gain some traction is if I mean, the disenchantment with the political system, political party continues, and if alternate political, I mean, groups do not emerge, then I mean, people might see the monarchists as the monarchists argue the only chance for Nepal and so on. But luckily, in the last elections, uh, the mayor of Kathmandu, the mayor of Dharan, the mayor of Dhangadi, and so and many other places, there are independence people have come who may have delivered something or may not have delivered something, but who are very clean in terms of corruptions and so on. So, and there are other groups. So, because of that, people have hopes on other political actors, political organizations, and so on. So that will also, I mean, not make the royalist group attract all the disenchantment and so on. So I don't think there is. I don't think the monarchy will come back in Nepal. And the third factor is partly because of the, I mean, former King Gyanendra, many think was behind the massacre of his brother and his families. His son, I mean, Paras, who doesn't have political aspirations, who is happy to just, I mean, enjoy his life and so on, and with his many, I mean, kandas and activities and so on. So there are, for many reasons, I think monarchy will not.
Possibly return. Thank you, Professor. And given time, I think we can end with one final question, and we'll open it up to the rest of the audience. Uh, so, Prithvi Narayan Shah famously characterized Nepal as a yam caught between two boulders. And of course, this was in reference to, the strategic location of Nepal between India and China. How, in this context, in the contemporary context that we see, how does Nepal navigate its relationship with its neighbors, and do we see manifestations of the ethnic politics, the lack the economic backwardship, and the instability that Nepal has gone through in its, management of its neighbors? If you could just briefly talk to us, is there a comprehensive foreign policy in place? Is it dominated by certain interest groups, certain ideas? And how does management of two powerful neighbors usually take place in Nepal?
I think the Prithvi Narayan's that quote is quite famous in Nepal as well, and it appears to capture the situation. But at that time, Prithvi Narayan Shah was trying to, I mean, gain support within the country by saying that there are other laws, I mean, external forces that could gobble down Nepal and so forth. So that was one interpretation of why that quote came about. Now, with regard to Nepal's foreign policy, I think Nepal doesn't have a foreign policy. So that is one of the major issue. So what the political leaders have been doing is, I mean, some people talk about how India intervenes, how China intervenes, how the US intervenes in Nepal, and so on. I think any country would intervene in any other country if its intervention works. No? But in Nepal, what has happened is the Nepali political leaderships goes to India, China, and maybe even to the US and tries to cultivate the political, leaders over there in terms of support to their partisan or and personal power getting in Nepal. So, for example, I think I don't know whether you are India or not. Nepali politicians make regular pilgrimage to New Delhi, not to promote Nepali foreign policy, but to promote themselves. So hopefully, with India's good grace, they would become the prime minister or maybe the minister or something. So that is a tragic situation in Nepal. I don't, of course, foreign powers also play a role, but it is the Nepali politicians who invite intervention on their behalf that has created problems in terms of foreign policy. So, as you suggested, not directly but indirectly, the way out of it is for Nepal to form a comprehensive foreign policy that is with the consultations of political or social forces. So that way, Nepal's interest will be protected if Nepal goes as one entity to foreign powers. But unfortunately, that has not been the case in Nepal.
Thank you, Professor. It's been a good conversation, and I'll ask Neeti to sort of fetch questions from other members of the team if they have any, and if she has a few as well.
Sir, thank you, and thank you, Priyanka, for the brilliant discussion. Sir, there is one thing in my mind. As someone with roots in Siangja, I've seen ethnic discrimination in my own family and community. My question to you would be like, why has this ethnic identity become so dominant in Nepal political agenda even today? Shouldn't it be more focused on the other common development priorities like and healthcare, and why is is this emphasis on the identity more as a result of history, or it is also influenced by Nepal's geography and social structure? And in continuation to this question, there is another one. As Nepal enters and the world enters into the age of digital and the AI, so-called AI age, what implication might it have on ethnic exclusion, on the digital democracy and civic participation? Are there any new risk or the opportunities that policymakers or the common people should focus on?
Again, thank you. I'll try to remember all the parts of the questions. So, the first question, the reason, identity politics asserts in any societies when there is discrimination based on identity. So, for example, your question, why should people not focus on economic development? Then it would probably benefit everyone and so on. Just let me just give you an example. Let's assume in Sangja or anywhere, a Dalit opens a tea stall. He or she will not have that many clients, or may not have any clients at all if people know that he or she is a Dalit. In an urban setting, probably they would not recognize his or her identity. But even in Kathmandu, there are Dalits have not been able to find, apartments for rent if their identities are discovered. So just imagine when you have such level of discrimination, everyday discrimination, and how will those people become economically mobile? How will they, if they have problem issues getting an apartment, if an entrepreneur has problem issue getting his or her tea sold, then economic development cannot occur. No, so the context is once ethnic, gender, religious discrimination are ended, then it creates a same path for economic opportunities, economic development, and so on. So, and that's what we have seen in many countries. once ethnic issues are addressed, then that issue doesn't become an issue. No, then people begin to aspire for other things. So if a Dalit doesn't get a apartment in Kathmandu, then he or she has to, organize and mobilize. No, all of them may not do, but those who are aware, they'll try to form association and so forth. The solution to that is to address the ethnic, gender, religious discrimination if there are in any other countries. Then people will focus on other parts because those are no longer the concerns and so on. Now, with regard to social media, AI, and other things, this digital world, there are, I think in Nepal, it has both, positive and negative consequences, if you would. And we tend to, perceive that oftentimes that the digital technology and so on are neutral and so forth. But who can afford a good phone? Those who can afford it, no? Those who are poor may not, maybe just hanging around with that old phone, or maybe they didn't have a phone at all. So who gets to post on Facebook, Instagram, and so on? Those who have access to it, no? To create stories, create contents, and so on. So it has, those, and then the issue is on whose language do you post those things. So, for example, in Nepal, there are small groups or linguistics communities with less than 100,000 people. Can they, they are fluent and they are more able to create creative contents in their own language. But can they post? Can they create? How many audiences would be? So, these are some of the things that we need to think about. But then the other side is in Nepal, even the media is controlled by the ruling ethnic group and the state. So now with the explosion of social media, online media outlets, hopefully the AI thing and so on, now there are alternate sources of information, alternate source of communication, alternate sources of media. So at least it has gone outside the control of the government, the state, and maybe the ruling group. The ruling group still has significant presence because of the language, because of other factors, but the challenges have also emerged. So in that sense, I think there is opportunity, but then there are constraints as well in terms of these new technologies and so on. And now in Nepal, for some people, the concern is with this all these technologies, globalization. Some are concerned now. I mean, I don't know whether it's a concern, but some people raise the issue of now the global culture also penetrating on the Nepali society. And if it is with regard to, individual rights, group rights, democracy, human rights, I'm all for it. But some people are concerned about these things as well. Did I answer all segments of the question?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. So there is one question from our geopolitical researcher again. His name is Orko. I'll paste the question in the chat, and I'll also narrate the question to you. How is Nepal balancing economic development with environmental conservation, particularly in ecological sensitive areas like the Himalayas?
I think Nepal is doing badly and in terms of balance, and not. I'll just like to take it slightly away from the question, not in terms of balancing between economic development and environmental conservation, but though in Nepal, the state and its cronies are plundering the environment. For example, I don't know whether you probably are aware, Nepal, there is the Madhes, the plains in the south, then there is the Bhitri Madhes, or Chure, small hills, then the taller mountains, then the Himalayas, no? So in the Chures, they have been plundering to collect granite, gravels, and all those kind of things. So now there is increasingly the issue of whether the Tarai would have water because the water flows from the north, no? So this year we saw, there are floods and in other parts of Nepal, but in the Madhes there is a lack of rain, there is drought and so forth. So I don't know whether it is directly because of this plundering of the nature and so forth. So in Nepal, as earlier, the trend is same. Whenever there is an opportunity to plunder, some of these plunderers, they tie up network with the politicians. Maybe they give a small portion of it. Then if the politicians get a small portion share of it, then they have allowed the plundering of the country, and including in terms of natural resources and so forth, like the stones and so on and so forth.
Right, sir. Thank you. I hope, Orko, your answer, the question is answered. Priyanka, is there something else you want to ask, or can we end the session?
I think Professor's been very generous with his time and knowledge, so we can
Absolutely.
wrap up the session. I have no questions. And if we
Right.
do have a few questions, sir, we would like your permission to email them to you perhaps in the future so that we could talk about it.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very
So,
much, Niti and Priyanka.
Thank you so much.
thank you, sir. Thank you, Priyanka, and everyone who have joined us today. Thank you for being part of Decypher Spotlight session. We hope the discussion sparked new reflections and questions. Thank you, everyone.